Hi, and welcome to RAN in Focus, a podcast brought to you by the Radicalisation Awareness Network, RAN practitioners. My name is Jordi Nijenhuis, and today I'll be having a three-way conversation with a frontline practitioner and an expert about the drivers of radicalization and how these drivers may be changing. Obviously, the COVID-19 pandemic, the war in Ukraine and the energy crisis have had a huge and ongoing impact on communities right across Europe. And the fear among many practitioners is that events like these have created a really strong condition for violent extremists to radicalize and recruit, because all these drivers are increasing. In this podcast, I'll be trying to find out how all this might be manifesting on the ground, and also what we, as practitioners, can do about this, if anything. To help me do this, I'm going to be joined live by two guests. My first guest is Teun van Dongen, a senior research fellow and program lead, current and emerging threats at the International Center for Counterterrorism, ICCT, in The Hague, and he's also a RAN policy support expert. Hi Teun, thank you so much for joining us today.
Good to be with you.
And we are also joined by Pia Tofdal Rasmussen from Finn Nøgaard Association in Denmark. And she's a member of the RAN working group on youth, families and communities as a first-line practitioner. Hi, Pia.
Hi.
So it feels like we're facing a lot of crises in Europe right now. We've got the war in Ukraine, obviously. We've got inflation, the energy crisis. What kind of things are you seeing on the ground, Pia?
I see people really getting extremely frustrated, sleeping badly at night, thinking about their families, thinking about their businesses, thinking about how can I pay my bills.
And Teun, we're both from the Netherlands, and we've been facing very hard lockdowns over the past couple of years. The energy prices are going through the roof right here, right now. How do you perceive the impact of these multiple crises?
Yeah, I think the key word here is uncertainty. It's not so much that people in Europe are living in dire poverty, but what we know from previous studies is that the moment when what people have achieved is under pressure, that's when they will get angry, frustrated, and are also likely to protest. So it's not so much the objective socio-economic circumstances, but rather the idea that something that you're entitled to is being taken away from you.
That is where the anti-government feelings emerge, right? Along with that distrust from many people that build up during the COVID lockdowns.
Yeah, I think that all stems from the notion that people have to fetch for themselves, that there's no one who has their back anymore. And so that, I think, is a combination of the socio-economic factors that are feeling that uncertainty, and the way that uncertainty is being perceived, and also, of course, capitalized on by entrepreneurs who have these narratives that then resonate with these people.
I would say it's when we're talking about the socio-economic factors and conspiracy narratives, because I find that quite interesting. If you look at who is sort of into the narratives, it's both very poorly educated people, but it's also very highly educated people. It's mostly the people in the middle who they don't buy into conspiracy narratives. So it's not like you can say it's only the poor people, or it only has something to do with the financial situation. You also have a lot of very highly educated people who are angry about losing the liberty and rights and so on.
Okay, so we touched on the rise of conspiracy narratives during COVID and the pattern of anti-government, anti-authority sentiment. So I guess my question here is this pattern continuing, or is it something more ideological emerging from all of this?
With the extremists, they're sort of fishing in troubled waters here. And there's a lot of mobilization against the elite, I would say. And that's sort of the common factor of all these groups, that somebody in the top of the system has done something really wrong in order for them to end up in this situation. Yeah, so I see people very, very frustrated.
And a big part of that is also that in addition to having all these international events around you that you have no control over, there is no one who has your back. And I think that a lot of these anti-government, anti-institutional, or maybe more broadly extremist narratives that are going around are appealing to exactly that sentiment. And this is probably even true for the Islamic State a couple of years ago, when they were positioning themselves as this player towards a certain community who said, look, the people don't care about you, the government doesn't care about you, people around you don't care about you, we care about you. Join us, and then together we will build this state where you can be yourself. And I think that element of that do-it-yourself element is also visible to some extent in the anti-government or anti-institutional movement that we're seeing now. Because people are experiencing that distress. They see that there's a government that's helping other groups, migrants for instance, or at least that's the perception. And then so that gives them the idea that the government is not there for me. The government is maybe an obstacle at best and an enemy at worst.
Right? Offer a quick answer and an easy solution.
Well, but it does play into this. Like, let me give a very, very specific example with regard to housing in the Netherlands right now. Like, housing is like a huge issue. There aren't enough houses. We cannot build any because of environmental regulations. You have these migrants come in, and the government arranges housing for them. I mean, I'm not against that, but it does give people the idea that they're last on the list of government priorities, and so that also makes them withdraw within their own group and become hostile to these other groups who they feel are getting some preferential treatment. Like, when people rebel, it's not so much because of objective circumstances, but because they're being deprived of something that they feel they're entitled to.
But you can always find somebody else to blame for your problems. No matter what happens, you can always find some outsider that you don't know yet who is responsible for it. So it's a human thing. We like to do that because it keeps us free of responsibility.
And talking of responsibility, for many of us practitioners, this is a difficult area for us to think through. In one sense, socio-economic factors underline out the entire world. And even when it's specific, it's still complex, right? It's something we as practitioners, well, we don't really have an impact on those issues. We can, of course, talk to people about it, but fixing a crisis like we're facing right now in Europe, that's not our task. So how can we cope with this part?
Because obviously you can do good and important work, but you're also responding to major socio-economic developments that you have little control over. And I think it's also important to realize that you can maybe counter some really bad manifestations of this problem, but you're not getting to the core of the problem.
So how can we do that? How can we get to the core?
If you don't want to take part in the educational system anymore, or if you don't trust doctors or hospitals anymore, you're going to withdraw in yourself. It's going to lead to self-neglect, and it's really people committing slow suicide. And those kinds of issues should be part of our agenda here as well. There's a tendency sometimes, and maybe that has to do with this whole counter-terrorism, counter-radicalization infrastructure that we built, but that shouldn't shape our perception or narrow our perception of the problem. Just because we're hammers, that doesn't mean that all our problems are nails. But it's much more than that. I think that it's important to recognize that as well, because that also opens up other potential solutions.
Pia, as a practitioner, Do you think that's an accurate description of the general approach across P and CVE? And do you agree, more importantly, that we perhaps need to change our view of the landscape or our approach to it?
I think you're partly right. I mean, if we're talking about this as a political issue, that the politicians need to react to this, both in the shorter and the longer term. And I think in the longer term that inequality is a huge problem. Inequality is rising, and if the politicians don't make reforms to address this, it's not going to become easier with this problem.
And do you feel that these pressures and this certainly perceived lack of action by authorities may be pushing people towards actions at all? And if so, how can we prepare for this kind of possibility?
We don't know. We don't know yet. But I think it's extremely important. And I see that every day in my life, that the government and the governmental institutions can't do everything by themselves. They need a strong civil society to help out among the citizens and sort of to prevent radicalization before it becomes an issue. You can't wait for the problem to occur and then say, oh, what do we do? Because that's what happened here. We didn't think we were able to be hit by terror, but we were, and we didn't have enough awareness about how to prevent it. So I would say keep up the good work and keep what you're doing and staying in contact with the citizens and help them out in the problems that they have and try to reintegrate people back into the society that they live in and subscribe to a common truth instead of subscribing to a lot of different truths and narratives. So I think there's an extremely important role to play for the organizations that work with the citizens.
Yeah, I think be realistic about what you can achieve. The issues that you're dealing with, that you're facing, come from factors that are much bigger than an individual can take on. So, to some extent, you're just going to have to accept that you're always going to play catch up.
So how important are networks then? And how can we kind of lean on them as practitioners now?
I think it's an extremely important conversation that we're having now, obviously between different observations, different countries. It's an international problem that we're dealing with, and it's a problem that crosses between disciplines and so on. So I think it's extremely important that we keep on exchanging knowledge and views and ideas across everything and to create an alliance for this.
Yeah, we have this infrastructure, so we might as well use it. Because a lot of the same people that were dealing with jihadist radicalization 5 to 10 years ago are now also involved in efforts to engage with new types of extremism. So building on that infrastructure, on those networks to share knowledge and experiences would, I think, be highly valuable.
Okay, that seems as good a point as any to end this discussion on. I could honestly talk all day about this fascinating and extremely multifaceted subject matter. But I do know that we all have jobs to go to. So, thank you, Teun.
It was great to be with you.
Thank you, Pia, for joining us today.
I think it's been an interesting conversation, and thank you for inviting me.
And finally, a big thank you to all of you listening. And I do hope you can join me next time for the next episode of RAN in Focus, brought to you by RAN practitioners. Goodbye.